After my wife died, my son showed up with a stack of legal papers and said, "Dad, we need to talk about the house. My lawyer begged me to fight." I said, "Give it all to them." Everyone thought I'd lost my mind. At the final signing, I handed over every document they asked for. My son smiled, until his lawyer stopped mid-sentence and turned pale. "My name is Gerald Kowalski. I'm 67 years old. I built my house with my own 2 hands, and I mean that literally. Poured the foundation myself, framed the walls, ran the electrical. Laid every floor from the front door to the back bedroom. Took 3 years. Eleanor used to bring me lunch in a cooler and sit on a stack of plywood just to keep me company. That was 1984. We were young and broke and happy, and we didn't know yet how good we had it. We had 38 years together. Then the cancer took her. She was gone 3 days when Clifford showed up. My son is 42, real estate attorney out of San Francisco. Sharp dresser, firm handshake, good in a room. He has Eleanor's eyes and none of her honesty. His wife Nadine came with him the way she always does. Nadine is the kind of woman who smiles at you while she's counting what's in your wallet. They sat down at my kitchen table, the same table Eleanor and I had coffee at every morning for 30 years. I'd made a fresh pot out of habit, even though I hadn't been able to drink more than half a cup since the funeral. Clifford set a manila folder on the table and slid it across to me like we were closing a deal. "Dad," he said, "we need to handle the estate." He opened the folder and walked me through a will, an older version Eleanor had drafted years before she got sick. According to that document, the house went to Clifford and my daughter Sylvia jointly. The 2-acre lot out back, same deal. The savings split between them. I was left with $150,000 from Eleanor's life insurance. That was it. That was my share of 38 years. Then Nadine leaned forward and mentioned the medical bills, $95,000 left over from Eleanor's treatment. Since I was her husband and had been part of her care decisions, she said, the hospital would likely come to me for payment. $15,000 minus $95,000 left me with $55,000 and no home. I looked at my daughter Sylvia. She was sitting in the corner near the window looking at the floor. She didn't say a word the whole time. She never does when Clifford's running things. Then I looked at my son. He looked back at me with the same flat expression he probably uses in depositions. No hesitation, no apology. He'd made his decision a long time before he walked through my door. "You can stay through the end of the month," Clifford said. "We think that's more than fair." Fair. He used that word about the house his mother and I built from nothing. I told them I needed a few days to think it over. Clifford said, "Of course, take all the time I needed." But the medical bills, he added, the longer they sat, the more complicated things could get. They left. I stood at the kitchen window and watched Clifford's car back out of the driveway. Nadine was already on her phone before they reached the street. I didn't call a lawyer that night. I didn't call anyone. I just sat in the house for a while in the quiet, trying to figure out what Eleanor would have told me to do. That answer came sooner than I expected. It was late, maybe 11, when I ended up in Eleanor's corner of the bedroom. She had a small writing desk there by the window. That's where she did the bookkeeping she took on for a few local businesses after she retired. Neat stacks, color-coded folders, everything labeled. She was the most organized person I've ever known. And I say that as a man who spent 40 years reading blueprints for a living. I wasn't looking for anything. I just didn't want to be anywhere else in the house. I started going through her desk drawers slowly, the way you do when you're not sure you're ready to find what might be there. In the bottom drawer, under a stack of old tax returns going back to 2009, I found my old job site notebook, spiral-bound, brown cover, water-stained at the corner. My handwriting on the outside from the early days of the business, I hadn't seen that notebook in at least 10 years. I didn't know Eleanor had taken it. I pulled it out and set it on the desk. Tucked inside the front cover was a sealed envelope, her handwriting on the front, small and careful the way she always wrote. "Read the notebook first, then open this." I sat there for a moment with it in my hands. The house was completely quiet. I could hear the refrigerator running downstairs. Outside, a car passed on the road, and then it was quiet again. I opened the notebook. The notebook wasn't full of job site notes. Eleanor had been using it for the past 8 months, page after page in her careful handwriting. Printed emails folded into thirds and tucked between the pages. Account numbers written out in columns. Copies of documents I had never seen in my life. She'd been working in that notebook while she was on chemo, while she was losing her hair and sleeping 14 hours a day and telling me she was too tired to talk much in the evenings. She'd been sitting at that little desk doing this. The first thing I came across was a printed email chain between Clifford and a man named Roland Hess, who I later found out was his accountant. The emails were dated about 10 months back, right around the time Eleanor's diagnosis had gotten serious. Clifford had used my name to co-sign 2 commercial property loans. He hadn't asked me, hadn't mentioned them. He'd signed my name on the documents himself. Total amount across both loans, $160,000. Eleanor had found the paperwork by accident, tucked into a folder Clifford had left at our house after Thanksgiving. She recognized my signature immediately because she'd been looking at my signature on checks and contracts for 38 years. She knew it wasn't right. She didn't say anything to me. She didn't call Clifford. What she did was go find an independent notary and have him pull verified samples of my real signature from existing documents, things I'd signed going back years. Mortgage papers, tax returns, business contracts from the early days of the company. The notary compared those to the signatures on Clifford's loan guarantees and put his findings in writing. Eleanor had kept every page of it. I had to stop reading for a while after that. I got up and walked downstairs and stood in the kitchen for maybe 10 minutes. I didn't turn on any lights. I just stood there in the dark, looking out the window at the yard I'd been mowing for 38 years. Then I went back upstairs and kept reading. The next section of the notebook was a bank statement for an account I hadn't known existed. Eleanor had taken out a refinance on the house 6 months before she passed. $380,000. The money had been moved into a separate account opened in my name only. She'd done it quietly without telling me because she knew if she told me I would ask questions and Clifford might find out. Further into the notebook, I found the documentation for the backlot. Eleanor had placed a legal restriction on it through Philip Hartley, an estate attorney she'd found on her own and never mentioned to me. The restriction prevented the lot from being sold or transferred for 5 years. If anyone broke that restriction and forced a sale, every dollar from it went directly to a charitable trust in Eleanor's name. Clifford and Sylvia would get nothing from that land and the $95,000 in medical bills that Nadine had brought up so smoothly at the kitchen table. Eleanor had cleared the full balance 4 months before she died and kept the receipts in a separate folder at the back of the notebook, organized by date and provider. There were no outstanding medical bills. There never had been. Nadine had sat at my kitchen table and invented a debt out of thin air. I sat with all of that for a long time. It was past 1 in the morning by then. I hadn't noticed the time moving. I thought about what Clifford must have been thinking when he walked into my house 3 days after his mother's funeral. How certain he must have been. He'd seen the will. He had the paperwork ready. He'd brought Nadine to handle the softer pressure, the medical bill angle, the sympathetic voice. He'd come in with everything prepared and he'd expected me to sit there and absorb it and eventually say yes because what else was I going to do? He'd known Eleanor was sick for 18 months. He'd had 18 months to plan this. What he didn't know was that his mother had had 8 of those months too. I picked up the envelope, her handwriting on the front small and steady even near the end when the medication made everything harder. I opened it and read what she'd written. Gerald, I know how you think. If I told you about this while I was alive, you would have gone straight to Clifford and it would have turned into a fight and lawyers and years of stress that I didn't want for you. So I handled it the way I handle things. Quietly, Philip Hartley has the real will, the one I signed 6 weeks ago. Everything goes to you. Whatever you decide to give Clifford and Sylvia after that is your choice, not an obligation. Philip will know when to step in. Trust him. The house is yours. You built it. Don't let anyone tell you differently. I love you. Let them sign first. Then let Philip do the rest. Eleanor? A business card was paper-clipped to the bottom of the letter. Philip Hartley, estate and trust attorney. I set the letter down on the desk, sat there in the quiet for another few minutes. Then I picked up my phone and saved Philip's number. I'd call him in the morning. Tonight, I just needed to sit with the fact that my wife, even at the end, had been thinking about me. Philip Hartley worked out of a small office in Midtown, second floor of a building that didn't have a parking garage or a lobby with marble floors. Just a staircase and a frosted glass door with his name on it. The kind of place where actual work gets done without a lot of performance around it. He was in his late 50s, wore reading glasses on a cord around his neck, and had the unhurried way of speaking that comes from spending decades choosing words carefully. Eleanor had found him through a referral from an old friend who had gone through a difficult estate situation of her own. She'd called him cold, walked into his office alone, and told him everything. He told me she'd come to see him 8 months before she passed. Initially, she wanted help understanding what her options were if Clifford was forging documents. By the second meeting, she'd decided she wasn't going to confront anyone. She was going to build something airtight and then step back and let it run. Philip had guided her through every piece of it. The refinance on the house, the legal restriction on the backlot, the updated will, the notarized signature comparisons. He'd kept copies of everything in his office and had been waiting for my call since the day she passed. She was very clear about the sequence, he told me. She didn't want you contacted until you found the notebook yourself. She said if someone handed you the answer, you'd feel like you hadn't earned it. She wanted you to find it. That sounded exactly like Eleanor. She always said I did better when I figured things out myself. She wasn't wrong. Philip walked me through the real will. Eleanor had signed it 6 weeks before she died, with 2 independent witnesses and full notarization. It superseded the older version Clifford had been using. Under the real will, everything came to me. The house, the lot, the accounts, the business assets. Any decision about what Clifford and Sylvia received was mine to make, not a legal requirement. He also explained what happened to the house the moment Clifford accepted the title transfer. The $380,000 refinance Eleanor had taken out transferred with the property. Whoever held the title held the debt. Given the 2 failed investment loans Clifford had already guaranteed with my forged signature, no bank was going to refinance him. He'd be sitting on a house worth $520,000 with $380,000 owed against it and no clean way out. The back lot would be just as useless to him. The 5-year restriction Eleanor had filed through Philip's office was already on record. Clifford couldn't sell it, couldn't transfer it, couldn't use it as collateral. If he tried to force a sale through legal action, the proceeds went to Eleanor's charitable trust. He'd spend years in court fighting for nothing. He thinks he's inheriting assets, I said. He's inheriting obligations. Philip said, that's a meaningful difference. We talked for about an hour. Before I left, I asked Philip what Eleanor had been like in those meetings. He thought about it for a moment. Calm, he said. She was always calm. She never talked about being angry at Clifford. She talked about making sure you were protected. That was the only thing she seemed focused on. I drove home and called Clifford. Told him I was ready to move forward. He sounded relieved, which I'd expected. He suggested a dinner at his house later that week. Keep things friendly, go over the timeline together. I said that sounded fine. I want to be honest about something. Going into that dinner, I wasn't sure I could hold it together. I'd spent 42 years being that man's father. I'd taught him to drive. I'd helped him move 3 times. I'd written a check for his first year of law school without him even having to ask. Sitting across a table from him, knowing what I now knew was not a comfortable thing, but Eleanor hadn't asked me to be comfortable. She'd asked me to let them sign first. Clifford and Nadine lived in a house that projected a certain kind of success. New cars in the driveway, furniture that looked like it came from a catalog where nothing had a price tag on it. Nadine answered the door in a dress that cost more than my first truck. She pulled me into one of those hugs that doesn't quite land and told me I looked wonderful. Sylvia was already there, sitting in the living room with a glass of wine. She stood up when I came in and hugged me properly, the way she always had since she was small. I didn't say anything to her about what I knew. She hadn't been the one driving this, and I wasn't going to make her evening worse than it needed to be. Clifford poured drinks, and we sat in the living room for a while before dinner. He asked how I was managing. He mentioned twice how smoothly everything was going. He said Eleanor would have wanted the family to stay close through something like this. He used the word family the way some people use honestly right before they tell you something that isn't true. Dinner was well prepared, I'll give Nadine that. I ate everything on my plate. I complimented the food. I asked Clifford about a case he'd mentioned a few months back and let him talk about it for a while. I was patient. Eleanor had been patient for 8 months. I could manage one dinner. Somewhere around dessert I mentioned, almost as an aside, that I'd been going through Eleanor's desk and found some paperwork I didn't fully understand. Bank statements for accounts I hadn't recognized. Some property documents with language I wasn't familiar with. The conversation stopped, not dramatically. Just a half-second pause that wouldn't have meant anything to someone who wasn't watching for it. Clifford's fork slowed. Nadine's expression didn't change, but something behind her eyes did. What kind of documents? She asked. I said I wasn't sure, probably nothing. Eleanor had always handled the financial filing and her system didn't always make sense to me. I said I'd probably just bring everything to the signing and let Clifford help me sort through what was important. Clifford said, of course. Absolutely. That was the smart thing to do. Don't worry about any of it until we're all in the same room together. Nadine refilled my water glass and changed the subject to the weather. I watched both of them for the rest of the evening. The way Clifford kept his voice easy and unhurried. The way Nadine touched his arm twice at the table, small and quick. The kind of touch that means keep going. You're doing fine. They were good at this. They'd probably been practicing for a while. When I got up to leave, Clifford walked me out to my truck. He put his hand on my shoulder and said he was glad we were handling this like adults. He said Eleanor would have been proud of how the family was coming together. I told him I appreciated that. I meant it in a way he didn't understand. I called Philip from the driveway before I started the engine. Told him dinner had gone as expected. He said he'd filed the real will with the probate court that morning and everything was in order. We confirmed the signing time for Thursday. I slept better that night than I had since Eleanor passed. Thursday came gray and cool. The kind of morning that feels like it's waiting for something. I put on a decent shirt, had my coffee, and drove to the title company office on my own. No lawyer beside me, no backup, just me and whatever Eleanor had put in motion. Clifford was already there when I arrived. He'd brought his attorney, a younger man named Reeves who had the over-prepared energy of someone billing by the hour. Nadine sat to Clifford's left. Sylvia was in a chair along the wall, a little apart from the group, the way she'd been sitting at my kitchen table the week before. Philip Hartley came in a few minutes after me, set his briefcase down quietly, and took a seat without making anything of it. Clifford introduced Reeves as his estate attorney, and noted they had everything ready to go. He seemed relaxed, comfortable. He glanced at my side of the table and didn't seem concerned that I hadn't brought anyone with me. The title officer started working through the transfer documents, page by page the way they do. Initial here, sign here, Gerald Kowalski, transferring interest in the primary residence at 412 Birchwood. Gerald Kowalski, transferring interest in the adjacent 2-acre parcel. I signed where I was told. Every page, every line. I didn't hesitate and I didn't ask questions. Clifford caught my eye once across the table and gave me a small nod. The kind of nod that says, good, this is almost over. Nadine had her hands folded on the table and was watching the title officer work through the stack. Then the title officer reached the property detail section and began reading the recorded encumbrances into the record. Standard procedure. She read it the same flat way she'd read everything else. The property at 412 Birchwood carried an outstanding mortgage lien of $380,000, originated 6 months prior and held by First Valley Bank. The lien transferred with the title. The incoming owner would be required to address the outstanding balance within 60 days of title transfer or face default proceedings. Reeves stopped writing. Clifford leaned forward. What lien? The title officer read it again. Same number, same terms. Clifford looked at Reeves. Reeves was already going through his folder, flipping pages, looking for something that should have been there and wasn't. He hadn't known. Clifford hadn't told him because Clifford hadn't known either. Eleanor had filed the refinance paperwork quietly 6 months before she died, and no one had thought to pull a full title search before the signing. The room had gone very still. Then Philip Hartley set his briefcase on the table and opened it. He placed a document in the center of the table. Eleanor's real will. Signed, witnessed, notarized. He slid a copy toward Reeves and said he'd filed the original with the probate court on Tuesday morning. The will Eleanor had signed 6 weeks before her death superseded the version Clifford had been working from in every legal respect. Reeves picked it up and started reading. His expression didn't change much, but his jaw tightened. Philip then placed a second set of documents on the table. The notarized signature samples, the printed email chain between Clifford and Roland Hess. The side-by-side comparison prepared by the independent notary showing Gerald Kowalski's real signature against the signatures on the 2 loan guarantee documents. These have been submitted to the Civil Fraud Division, Philip said. A review is already open. Nobody said anything for a moment. I looked at my son across the table. He was staring at the documents in front of Reeves. His face had gone the color of old concrete. Nadine was the first one to speak. She said this was clearly some kind of mistake and that they should all take a breath and get their respective attorneys on the phone before anyone drew any conclusions. Reeves put his hand on the table in a way that told her to stop talking. Clifford was still looking at the documents. He hadn't looked up at me yet. I'd known this man his entire life, and I could tell he was running through his options the way he always did, looking for the angle, the procedural move, the argument that might still turn this around. He was a good attorney. He was trying to find a way out of a room his mother had spent 8 months making sure had no exits. Finally, he looked up. I gave him a moment. Then I spoke. Your mother found those loan papers by accident. A folder you left at the house after Thanksgiving. She recognized my signature wasn't right because she'd been looking at it for 38 years. She didn't tell me because she knew I'd come straight to you and it would turn into a confrontation, so she handled it herself. While she was on chemo, while she was trying to get through every day. I let that sit for a second. I'm not here to put you in prison. That's not what this is. But here's what's going to happen. You're going to sign a repayment agreement for $160,000 structured payments. Notarized, fully enforceable. You're also going to sign a document stating that you will never contest my estate, my property, or any financial matter connected to your mother's will. All future communication goes through attorneys. You don't call me. You don't stop by. You don't send Nadine to my door with a sympathy casserole and a figure she invented. Clifford's jaw tightened at that last part. Nadine looked at the table. If you agree to those terms, Philip holds the fraud documentation and the civil review stays open but inactive. If you don't agree, he files everything today and you defend a forgery claim on record as a licensed attorney in the state of California. Reeves leaned over and the two of them talked in low voices for a few minutes. I didn't try to hear what they were saying. I already knew where it was going. There was only one direction it could go. Clifford straightened up and said they would agree to the terms. The papers were drawn up and signed before noon. Clifford's signature on the repayment agreement. Clifford's signature on the non-contest declaration. He signed them the same way he signed everything, clean and fast, like a man who had made peace with the outcome. Maybe he had? I didn't ask. Sylvia hadn't said a word through any of it. When it was over, she stood up, looked at me for a moment, and then looked away. She left without saying goodbye to anyone. Nadine walked out right behind her without looking at me at all. Clifford shook Reeves's hand and picked up his briefcase. At the door, he stopped and turned back. He looked like he was going to say something. Then he didn't. He just left. Philip and I sat in the conference room for a few minutes after everyone was gone. He gathered his documents back into his briefcase, in the same unhurried way he did everything. She would have liked seeing that, he said. I told him I thought so too. That was 6 months ago. I'm still in the house, still sleeping in the same bedroom, still having my coffee at the same kitchen table. Last month, I finally painted the front fence, something Eleanor had been after me about since 2019. Took me half a Saturday. I don't know why I waited so long. Clifford has made his first 2 payments on schedule. The transfers come through Philip's office. I haven't spoken to Clifford directly since the title company. Sylvia called about 6 weeks after the signing. She said she was sorry. She said she hadn't known about the forged signatures and that she should have pushed back harder when Clifford started driving the whole thing. I told her I believed her and that we'd figure out the rest as we went. We've had dinner once since then. It was quiet, but it was okay. Nadine filed for divorce 4 months after the signing. I heard that from Sylvia. I set up a small fund in Eleanor's name, runs through a local legal aid office, helps older people dealing with financial pressure from inside their own families. Philip helped me structure it. It doesn't cost much to operate, but it does something real. People ask me if I'm angry about what Clifford tried to do. Honest answer is that the anger comes and goes. What stays is something else. It's the image of Eleanor at that little desk by the window, sick and tired, and working through those documents 1 page at a time, making sure I'd be standing on solid ground after she was gone. That's what 38 years of a good marriage looks like. Not the easy parts. The part where she was running out of time and she spent some of it on me. I built that house. She made sure I got to keep it. If any of this sounds familiar to you, if you've been pushed to the edge by people who were supposed to have your back, I want to hear from you. Drop a comment below and tell me where you're watching from. And if this story stayed with you, there are 2 more on the screen right now that I think you'll want to see.